Do you remember those 1980s suppers that made every night feel like home? They filled kitchens with warmth, laughter, and the smell of comfort. When did we stop cooking food that felt this real? Baked salmon loaf was a classic fish-based entree that appeared frequently in old church cookbooks, prized for its ease of preparation and satisfying flavor. Made by combining flaked canned or fresh salmon with breadcrumbs, eggs, and seasonings, the mixture was shaped into a loaf and baked until firm and golden. This dish was often served cold, sliced for sandwiches or platters, but could also be enjoyed warm as a main course. Baked salmon loaf offered a practical way to stretch limited fish supplies while providing essential nutrients, fitting well with the frugal mindset of church kitchens. The loaf was usually accompanied by simple sauces such as tartar or lemon butter to enhance its taste. It was a popular choice during Lent or other fasting periods when meat was avoided, ensuring congregations could enjoy hearty meals without breaking religious observances. Baked salmon loaf remains a nostalgic reminder of the adaptability and creativity found in communal cooking traditions. Stewed tomatoes and bread was the kind of dish that only makes sense if you have lived through scarcity. Ripe tomatoes from the garden were peeled and simmered down with a little onion, sugar, and butter. Into that bubbling pot went chunks of stale bread, soaking up the juices and turning soft and rich like dumplings. Sometimes you added salt and pepper. Sometimes you just let the tomatoes speak for themselves. This dish was not flashy. It was not the star of the table, but it was honest. It used what was on hand and turned waste into warmth. People ate it as a side, a main, or even for breakfast. It was especially common in summer when the gardens were overrun and the bread box was more crust than loaf. Over time, stewed tomatoes and bread disappeared from memory, written off as depression food, too humble for modern kitchens. But back then, it filled bellies, quieted hunger, and reminded families that simple food could still mean something. Sometimes all you needed was what you already had. Pepper steak stir-fry was how families tried to recreate the magic of Chinese takeout without picking up the phone. Thin strips of beef were browned quickly in oil, then tossed with sliced bell peppers, onions, and a sauce made from soy, garlic, and a touch of cornstarch. It cooked fast, filled the house with savory aromas, and tasted bold and fresh even when made with basic ingredients. This was the 1980s version of a home-cooked stir-fry, simple, satisfying, and endlessly adaptable. Some added mushrooms, some tossed in a handful of bean sprouts or water chestnuts. But at its core, pepper steak was all about the beef and the peppers. The sauce thickened just enough to coat every piece, and it all got spooned over a mound of white rice, steaming and soft. It felt like a restaurant dish, without the price tag or the wait. Pepper steak stir-fry made dinner feel like an occasion. It gave families something new to try, without straying too far from what they knew. And most importantly, it brought everyone to the table. Spam and eggs was the morning meal of those who had little time, little money, but still wanted to start the day with something warm. That metal can, with its unmistakable pop and salty perfume, was a fixture on the counter in countless kitchens. Spam did not pretend to be fancy. It was a slab of meat that laughed in the face of labels. Sliced thick, fried until the edges crisped and curled, it sat next to scrambled eggs like an old friend who never judged. And the eggs, sometimes fresh, sometimes powdered, were fluffed just enough to give you the illusion of plenty. This was the kind of breakfast that filled bellies before school and work, when the house still smelled like sleep and the only sound was the sizzle from the pan. It was fast, it was cheap, and it worked. In many homes, it was the meal you had on the mornings that really mattered. The test day, the double shift, the long ride ahead. Spam and eggs never won awards, but it never needed to. It showed up. It stayed reliable. And for all its simplicity, it left behind the kind of warmth that never really fades. Ambrosia salad is one of those desserts that could brighten up any gathering. A perfect blend of fruit, marshmallows, and a creamy dressing. It's a dish that embodies everything we love about classic church potluck food. Sweet, refreshing, and easy to make. Whether it's served at Christmas dinners, family picnics, or Sunday services, ambrosia salad always brings a sense of celebration to the table. The mixture of fruits like mandarin oranges and pineapple combined with mini marshmallows creates a colorful and festive dish that everyone loves. The creamy dressing, often made with sour cream or whipped topping, ties it all together, adding just the right amount of sweetness. It's a dish that can be thrown together in minutes but still feels special. And if you think ambrosia salad is a fun way to end a meal, wait until you try the next dish, a sweet, fruity classic that's just as delicious. Fresh, vibrant, and undeniably wholesome, Fellowship fruit kebabs were a beacon of color on church picnic tables. In an era when gelatin molds and mayonnaise-based salads reigned supreme, these skewers offered a refreshing alternative. Simple yet elegant, they featured a variety of seasonal fruits, pineapple, melon, grapes, and berries, artfully arranged on sticks and drizzled with a honey-lime glaze. The practicality of fruit kebabs was one of their biggest selling points. Easy to assemble, they required no utensils, making them a perfect grab-and-go option for outdoor gatherings. Plus, their versatility made them universally appealing. Whether you preferred tropical fruit, classic apple chunks, or a mix of whatever was on sale, the recipe adapted to suit any budget or taste. Add in the bright, tangy kick of honey and lime, and you had a snack that balanced natural sweetness with a touch of zest. So, what caused this recipe to slip into obscurity? Partly, the rise of pre-cut fruit platters took away the need for the extra effort. Additionally, the modern obsession with charcuterie boards and grazing tables overshadowed the humble kebab. In the 1980s and 1990s, lighter, vegetable-forward dishes began making their way onto picnic tables as health-conscious trends gained momentum. Ewing Steele's orange rolls are a wholesome little pit stop in Southern and Midwestern cooking. They're fluffy, sweet, and just about the opposite of everything you've come to expect so far on this list. The dish itself refers to a pretty specific variant that got popular throughout the South. Ewing Steele himself is known for making these. I mean, it's in the name. But the rolls themselves represented a lot. They had typical American baking traditions such as puff pastries and buttery rolls, but they mixed that in with oranges, sweet tastes, and really comforting textures. That was common in Southern desserts, so it was a blend of both points of American cooking. Now, while people believe that Ewing Steele made it, they aren't sure, because there's no documented recipe or cookbook that shows us a process of him developing the dish. All we know is that it first popped up in the South, and then it popped up at everyone's potlucks. Those bright citrus flavors were the perfect thing to bring to a potluck. Few dishes from the 1970s could walk the line between savory and sweet quite like this one. Sweet potato soufflé did just that. It was a culinary bridge between vegetables and dessert. With its cloud-like texture, cinnamon-kissed sweetness, and the signature marshmallow topping, it offered both comfort and spectacle at every church potluck or holiday gathering. The dish has deep roots in Southern cooking, where sweet potatoes have been a staple for centuries. During the mid-20th century, this recipe gained widespread popularity as canned goods and convenience foods became kitchen staples. Marshmallows, introduced in the late 1800s and heavily marketed in the 20th century, were the final flourish, a whimsical, sugary topping that turned a simple casserole into a crowd pleaser. Yet, as tastes evolved, the soufflé began to fade from weekly menus. The sugar-heavy marshmallow layer clashed with growing concerns about healthier eating. Sweet potatoes themselves survived the shift, reborn as fries, chips, and roasted sides. But the soufflé, with its unapologetic decadence, became relegated to holiday tables and church cookbook archives. Egg salad loaf was a unique church supper favorite that transformed simple egg salad into an elegant, moldable dish perfect for slicing and serving at socials or potlucks. Hard-boiled eggs were finely chopped and combined with mayonnaise, mustard, and seasonings, then poured into a loaf pan or mold and chilled until firm. Once set, the loaf was carefully sliced into neat portions, often garnished with herbs or colorful vegetables to enhance its presentation. This dish elevated humble ingredients into something visually appealing and shareable, reflecting the creativity and care that went into church cooking. Egg salad loaf was both economical and filling, making it a reliable choice for feeding large groups without excessive expense. Its smooth texture and tangy flavor were crowd pleasers, especially when served with crackers or fresh bread. This recipe remains a charming example of how churches turned everyday foods into communal treats that brought people together in fellowship and celebration. Boiled dinner, New England style, was not meant to impress. It was meant to fill the table and the bellies. A hunk of salt pork or corned beef went into a pot with water and started boiling early in the day. After a few hours, in went the cabbage, potatoes, carrots, turnips, and whatever other root vegetables you had sitting in the bin. No seasoning beyond salt and maybe a bay leaf. No garnish. But the result? A broth so rich it clung to your spoon and vegetables so soft they could be cut with a fork handle. This was the food of New England farmhouses. It was born out of necessity, out of cold winters, tight budgets, and the need to feed a big family with what little you had. Served right from the pot, often in chipped bowls, it might not have looked like much. But it was hearty, reliable, and warm in a way that no microwave dinner ever could be. Now it is forgotten outside of a few family tables in Vermont or Maine. Too plain for restaurants, too slow for most kitchens. But if you ever taste it again, you will remember why it mattered. Chicken a la king was creamy, filling, and as comforting as a blanket straight from the dryer. This dish came from earlier decades, but it flourished in the 1980s thanks to its flexibility and ease. You diced up some chicken, usually leftover or canned, then folded it into a rich sauce made from butter, cream, and flour. Mushrooms, peas, or pimentos added texture and color. It all simmered into a creamy stew, then got ladled over toast, rice, or even puff pastry shells if you were feeling fancy. Chicken a la king turned odds and ends into something warm and generous. It did not need expensive ingredients or elaborate steps. It needed a single pan and a little patience. Families made it when they had too much leftover chicken. Cafeterias served it on square white plates. It looked beige, but it tasted like everything you needed after a long day. The sauce clung to every bite, soaking into toast or rice like a slow, savory flood. It was humble, yes, but it was dependable. In the mid-20th century, when creativity in the kitchen often stemmed from necessity, benevolent bologna cups made their debut as an ingenious way to stretch humble ingredients into a crowd-pleasing dish. A simple slice of bologna, baked into a cup shape in a muffin tin, became the perfect edible vessel for mashed potatoes, macaroni salad, or even coleslaw. This dish was both playful and practical, a combination that fit perfectly with the spirit of community potlucks and church picnics. The versatility of bologna cups was their standout feature. They could be filled with just about anything, making them adaptable to whatever leftovers or budget-friendly ingredients were on hand. They were also easy to portion and serve, making them ideal for large gatherings. And let's not forget their visual appeal. Seeing rows of neatly filled bologna cups on a table added a touch of whimsy to any spread. So, what led to their decline? Over time, bologna itself fell out of favor as food trends shifted toward fresher, less processed ingredients. The rise of more elaborate appetizers and finger foods also nudged this humble dish aside. Chicken cordon bleu casserole was the shortcut supper that turned a fancy French dish into a creamy, weeknight-friendly bake. You started with chopped chicken, leftover or canned. Add in cubed ham, a few slices of Swiss cheese, and a rich sauce made from sour cream or cream of chicken soup. It all went into a casserole dish and got baked until bubbly and golden on top. No stuffing, no rolling, just the flavors of chicken cordon bleu without the effort. This dish felt grown up, but it was easy enough for anyone to make. It tasted like something from a restaurant, even if it came from a bag of shredded cheese and a can of soup. It was a go-to for potlucks, holiday leftovers, or a random Tuesday night when you wanted something cozy but a little bit elevated. If your mother ever made it, you remember how the ham melted into the sauce and how the Swiss gave it that sharp edge that kept you coming back. Meatloaf with ketchup glaze was not just a dish, it was a ritual. Every family had their version, passed down or made up, and somehow they all tasted like home. ground beef stretched with breadcrumbs and eggs, seasoned with whatever was left in the spice rack, shaped into a loaf and topped with a thick smear of sweet ketchup, then baked until the glaze bubbled and caramelized at the edges. This was not fancy food. It was not supposed to be. It was designed to last, to satisfy, to keep you going. It fed families through layoffs and long winters, and it tasted better on day 2, sliced cold and slapped between 2 slices of bread. Some added onions, some added oatmeal, some swore by the secret of a splash of milk or a dash of Worcestershire sauce. But it was never about the ingredients. It was about the intention. Meatloaf said, "You matter enough for me to shape something by hand and make it last." It was a meal you could smell from the hallway, and it always pulled you to the table. Whether you loved it or barely tolerated it, you remembered it. And maybe that is what gives a meal its weight. Not the flavor, but the memory. Rabbit stew with root vegetables was a dish that came straight from the land and into the pot. If you lived on a farm or near woods, you hunted, and rabbit was one of the most common catches. It was not exotic, it was dinner. Dressed, seasoned, and simmered low and slow, rabbit would fall off the bone into a broth rich with potatoes, carrots, onions, and sometimes a turnip or two. This was no quick stew. It took hours. You used what you had on hand, and what came out was hearty, earthy, and deeply satisfying. Sometimes it was thickened with flour. Other times, it stayed more like a broth. It depended on the season, on the cook, on what you could afford. And for families who relied on self-reliance, it was a regular feature on the table. Children grew up recognizing the flavor of rabbit before they ever tasted beef. But as hunting became rare and grocery stores became everything, rabbit stew faded. Turkey and dressing casserole was a beloved way to repurpose holiday leftovers into a warm, satisfying meal for church gatherings. Combining shredded turkey with stuffing or dressing, often enriched with broth and sometimes vegetables or cheese, this casserole was baked until the top was crisp and golden. It transformed familiar flavors into a cohesive dish that could feed many with minimal effort. This casserole was especially popular after Thanksgiving or Christmas services, providing a communal way to enjoy festive tastes beyond the holiday itself. Turkey and dressing casserole spoke to values of thrift and togetherness, encouraging the efficient use of food while fostering fellowship around the table. It was a comforting dish that brought a sense of continuity and celebration to church suppers, reminding congregations of the blessings shared throughout the year. The recipe's enduring popularity highlights its role as a cherished tradition in community cooking. Quiche Lorraine somehow found its way from French cafes to American kitchens and never looked back. Made with eggs, cream, bacon, and Swiss cheese baked into a pie crust, it was the closest most families got to elegance on a weekday. It showed up at brunches, baby showers, and dinner tables alike, equal parts savory pie and silky casserole. The bacon brought salt, the cheese brought richness, and the cream made it smooth enough to spoon. This was a dish that made leftovers feel fancy. Leftover crust? Use it. Bits of bacon? Toss them in. Quiche Lorraine was forgiving and flexible, but it always looked like you tried. That was the secret. It felt refined without being complicated. Your mother could make it while balancing a phone call and homework help. It slid onto the table golden and steaming, and everyone got a slice. No fuss. Just quiet satisfaction. In the 1980s, it became shorthand for sophistication on a budget. It may have started in Paris, but by then, it lived in Pyrex. Salisbury steak was dinner dressed in its Sunday best, even if it was just Tuesday and you were eating on a TV tray. Ground beef shaped into thick ovals, seasoned like steak, then pan-seared and drowned in a dark, glossy gravy. It was the kind of meal that made kids sit up straight and adults exhale after a long day. Mashed potatoes were its loyal partner, soaking up the gravy like a sponge, so nothing went to waste. Sometimes there were green beans on the side, sometimes just a slice of white bread to mop the plate. Salisbury steak wasn't a luxury, it was a trick. A way to turn plain ground beef into something with presence. It pretended to be steak in a world where real steak was often too expensive. But nobody complained. In fact, most families welcomed it with open arms and full forks. It was hearty. It was simple. And it always filled the house with the smell of something good. You didn't ask for seconds because it was fancy. You asked because it made you feel full in more ways than one. Coconut sheet cake with pecan frosting is one of those desserts that defines indulgence. This cake is soft and fluffy, with the subtle sweetness of coconut permeating every bite. The cake itself is made with coconut milk, which keeps it moist and tender, while shredded coconut adds texture and flavor. The real magic, however, comes from the pecan frosting. Made with butter, sugar, and plenty of chopped pecans, this frosting is rich, nutty, and wonderfully sweet. It's spread generously over the top of the cake, creating a deliciously crunchy contrast to the soft, moist cake below. Coconut sheet cake with pecan frosting is often served at church events, family reunions, and special occasions, where its rich flavor and beautiful texture make it the perfect showstopper. The cake is easy to make in a sheet pan, making it ideal for feeding a crowd, and its flavor is universally loved. Whether it's for a birthday celebration or a holiday gathering, this cake is sure to be a hit. If you think this sweet, nutty dessert is the perfect way to end a meal, wait until you try the next recipe, a treat that combines flavors in a way you never thought possible. Stay tuned for more. During the mid-20th century, Jell-O desserts were the crown jewels of church picnics and potlucks, and cherished cranberry Jell-O squares were no exception. This layered creation brought together the tartness of cranberry gelatin, the sweetness of crushed pineapple, and the creamy richness of a whipped cream cheese topping. Its vibrant red hue made it visually striking, while the contrasting textures kept guests coming back for seconds. The practicality of this dish was undeniable. Gelatin-based desserts were inexpensive, easy to prepare, and required little more than a refrigerator and some patience. The recipe's versatility added to its appeal. Home cooks could swap in other fruits, experiment with different flavors of Jell-O, or even add chopped nuts for extra crunch. It was a crowd pleaser that could double as a side dish or a dessert, making it an all-star at potlucks. So why did this classic fade away? As tastes shifted toward fresher, less processed ingredients, gelatin dishes began to lose their charm. The rise of lighter, fruit-forward desserts also pushed these nostalgic treats to the sidelines. But for those who remember the wobble of a perfectly set square and the creamy tang of the topping, cherished cranberry Jell-O squares remain a sweet reminder of an era when creativity in the kitchen met the needs of a growing community. In the heyday of retro desserts, Charity Cherry Salad was a shining star at potlucks and family gatherings. This chilled dish combined bright maraschino cherries, velvety cream cheese, and fluffy whipped topping, creating a dessert that was as vibrant as it was indulgent. Served in elegant glass bowls or set in decorative molds, it added a touch of flair to any church supper table. The popularity of dishes like this can be traced back to the mid-20th century, when refrigeration revolutionized home cooking. Desserts that could be prepared ahead of time and served cold became the ultimate convenience for busy homemakers. Maraschino cherries, first commercialized in the early 1900s, were a pantry favorite thanks to their long shelf life and striking red color. Blending them with cream cheese and whipped topping was a clever way to create a dessert that felt rich but remained affordable. Despite its charm, Charity Cherry Salad fell out of fashion as modern palates shifted away from overly sweet processed ingredients. The rise of fresh fruit salads and lighter desserts in the late 20th century further sealed its fate. Fish stick supper was the dependable fallback that no one ever really admitted they loved, yet everyone secretly looked forward to. Pulled from the freezer, lined up on a tray, and baked until golden, those crispy little rectangles of breaded fish were the closest most kids came to seafood in the 1980s. They were always served with a scoop of boxed mashed potatoes and a side of canned peas, maybe drowned in butter if you were lucky. The tartar sauce came from a jar. The fish sticks came in bulk, but the meal somehow worked. It was crisp, soft, salty, and sweet all at once. You could eat it in 20 minutes flat, clean up in 10, and still have time for a rerun before bed. It was not gourmet, but it was familiar, dependable, safe, and sometimes that was more than enough. Parents loved it because it was foolproof. Kids loved it because it felt like fast food at home. It did not win awards, but it won weeknights. Fish stick supper was not trying to impress. It was trying to make dinner happen. And in the 1980s, that was the goal. Tater tot hot dish was never about refinement. It was about survival with a crispy top. Ground beef, sometimes mixed with onion or garlic, went into a casserole dish. Canned cream of mushroom or cream of chicken soup followed, along with green beans or corn from the cellar. Then came the tater tots, lined up in perfect little rows, ready to brown in the oven. It all baked together until the top turned golden and the edges bubbled like a stew with a crunchy lid. In Minnesota and across the upper Midwest, hot dish was not a trend. It was a way of life. Every family had their own version. Some used peas, some added cheese, some layered it twice. What mattered was that it was cheap, easy, and guaranteed to feed a house full of hungry people with just one pan. It showed up at funerals, potlucks, and weeknights where no one had time to cook. Today, tater tot hot dish is often reduced to a joke, but it kept people going. It kept them warm. It made do. And that, in its own right, is beautiful. Vegetable stuffed cabbage rolls were a nourishing and economical dish commonly served at church suppers, especially in communities with Eastern European heritage. Tender cabbage leaves were filled with a savory mixture of rice, vegetables, and seasonings, then baked or simmered in a tomato sauce until soft and flavorful. This dish was prized for its ability to transform simple ingredients into a comforting, cohesive meal that could be made in large batches. Stuffed cabbage rolls reflected values of thrift and tradition, embodying the spirit of communal cooking and sharing. The balance of tangy tomato sauce and savory filling made this dish a favorite at potlucks, holiday dinners, and festivals. Its continued presence in church cookbooks highlights its role in bringing people together through food that nourished both body and community. Pork chops and applesauce might sound like something from the 1970s, but it had real staying power into the 1980s. It was the kind of meal that felt both retro and reliable. Pork chops, pan-fried in a little butter or oil, were the centerpiece. Thin cut or bone-in, sometimes breaded, sometimes not. They were not fancy, but when they were seasoned well and seared just right, they brought serious flavor. The applesauce came on the side, often from a jar, sweet and cold against the warmth of the meat. Some people thought it was strange, others thought it was genius. The sweet and savory contrast worked better than expected. It gave the dish balance, simplicity, a little surprise. If your mother grew up on it, chances are she passed it down without changing a thing. Pork chops and applesauce did not need a lot of ingredients or time. It needed a skillet, a jar, and a family willing to sit at the table together. That was the magic of it. Creamed chipped beef on cornbread was not just breakfast. It was supper when meat was tight and the pantry was thin. Thin strips of dried, jarred beef were soaked to cut the salt, then fried in a skillet with a bit of butter or lard. Flour was whisked in to make a roux, followed by milk until a thick, creamy gravy formed. That salty beef gravy was poured over thick slices of baked cornbread, dense, golden, and hot from the pan. It was salty, creamy, and rich, with the cornbread soaking up every last drop. This was stick-to-your-ribs food, common in Southern and Appalachian kitchens. Kids grew up on it. Veterans knew it from military kitchens. Everyone had a name for it, some more polite than others. But in farmhouse kitchens, it was practical and beloved, cheap to make, filling to eat, and easy to pull together from long-lasting staples. Today, creamed chipped beef lives on in diner menus, but rarely over cornbread. That version, the one from cast iron pans and cloth aprons, is slipping away. But for those who remember it, that salty bite still feels like home. Quiche Lorraine was the pie that made people feel like they were part of something bigger, something continental. It came from France, or so the cookbook said, but in the 1970s, it found its place in American kitchens, surrounded by Tupperware and flower print aprons. Eggs, cream, crispy bacon, and shredded cheese, all baked into a flaky crust that somehow held it all together. It felt fancy, but it was forgiving. You could swap out ingredients, use what you had, and it would still come out golden. This was brunch food before brunch became a trend. It showed up at potlucks, baby showers, and quiet Sunday mornings when nobody was in a rush. It was the dish that made mothers feel like chefs and kids feel like they were getting away with eating pie for dinner. And maybe they were. Quiche Lorraine taught a generation that sophistication did not have to be expensive. It could come from a cracked ceramic dish and a hot oven, too. Pimento cheese spread is a Southern favorite that found its way into almost every church kitchen, making an appearance at picnics, church lunches, and family gatherings. This creamy, cheesy spread combines sharp cheddar cheese with diced pimentos, mayonnaise, and a touch of seasoning to create a rich, tangy, and slightly sweet spread that's perfect for just about anything. Whether it was slathered on crackers, served as a dip for celery, or spread thick on white bread triangles, pimento cheese spread was a go-to appetizer that could be made in minutes and was loved by all. The combination of sharp cheddar and mild pimentos was simple yet delicious, offering a comforting flavor that no one could resist. It's the kind of dish that became a tradition in many church kitchens, passed down from one generation to the next. And speaking of spreads, the next dish brings a surprising sweetness to the table, a cake that's rich in history and flavor. Stay tuned. Swiss steak is definitely something that was mostly a traditional 20th century concept, though. It was pretty common for the working class almost everywhere to rely on potlucks. Who could blame them? You find something that ticks most boxes, or in some cases, all of them. You keep it close. Everyone does that. Don't you have your comfort fast food places you swear by and always go to when you need an order you can rely on? Swiss steak was pretty much just like that, and it was the first time that people got to know about Swissing meat. That's, by the way, where it gets the name from, not any cultural ties to Switzerland. Lots of people were relying on tough cuts of meat that weren't really the same kind of quality, but they were a lot more affordable. People figured that some pork is better than no pork, and again, could you fault them? Still, these kinds of recipes needed a lot of work to really make them shine and not just be a slogfest you have to chew your way through. Swissing the meat and slow cooking it potluck style made sure that it would be soft and tender, and in the end, you'd get a pretty wonderful saucy stew. Few desserts capture the retro charm of the mid-20th century like the pineapple upside-down cake. Its signature design, caramelized pineapple slices and bright red maraschino cherries embedded in a golden cake, made it as visually striking as it was delicious. Praise pineapple. Upside-down cake was more than just a dessert. It was a conversation piece at church potlucks and community dinners. The dish rose to popularity in the 1920s and 1930s thanks to the invention of canned pineapple by the Hawaiian Pineapple Company. Their marketing campaigns promoted recipes featuring pineapple, and the upside-down cake, with its sweet, sticky topping, became an instant hit. By the 1950s and 60s, it had become a potluck classic, celebrated for its simplicity, just one pan, and its ability to turn everyday ingredients into a dessert that felt festive. As tastes evolved in the late 20th century, the cake began to lose its luster. The heavy use of canned ingredients and its sugary glaze didn't align with the growing emphasis on fresh, lighter desserts. Additionally, its iconic appearance became a symbol of an earlier era, less appealing to younger bakers seeking more modern flavors and aesthetics. Mid-century America loved a dish that could pull double duty, easy to prepare and satisfying enough to feed a crowd. Picnic Pea Salad Supreme fit the bill perfectly. This chilled salad, made with sweet green peas, crispy bacon, shredded cheddar, and a creamy dressing, was a real statement. In an era when canned and frozen vegetables were kitchen staples, this salad offered a way to transform humble peas into something extraordinary. It became a picnic regular, especially in the Midwest, where hearty and easy-to-make recipes reigned supreme. What made this dish so practical was its adaptability. The ingredients were pantry-friendly, the preparation was straightforward, and it held up well outdoors. No one likes a salad that wilts before the blessing. Its sweet and savory flavors appealed to kids and adults alike, and its vibrant colors made it visually appealing on any potluck table. Plus, bacon and cheddar, arguably the ultimate crowd-pleasing duo, did a lot of the heavy lifting. So, what happened? Well, somewhere along the line, Supreme salads lost their shine. Health-conscious trends and the rise of pre-made options nudged recipes like this into obscurity. Macaroni salad with pickles and Miracle Whip is a dish that defined many church picnics and potlucks in the 20th century. The combination of elbow macaroni, sweet pickles, and the tangy zip of Miracle Whip dressing made this dish a beloved classic. It was the perfect side to complement the heavier casseroles and meats often found at these gatherings. The sweet pickles added a burst of flavor that balanced the creamy dressing, while the macaroni provided that comforting base that everyone loved. Each bite of this macaroni salad is a mix of textures and flavors, from the crunch of the pickles to the smooth creaminess of the dressing. Whether served as a side or even as a standalone dish, macaroni salad with pickles and Miracle Whip was a crowd pleaser. But if you think this tangy delight was the highlight, wait until you experience the cool, sweet dish that followed this trend. Coming up next, beef and bean chili was the pot that fed the whole house and maybe even your neighbors too. It started with ground beef browned in a skillet, then mixed into a bubbling pot of kidney beans, tomatoes, onions, and whatever spices hadn't run out yet. It cooked slow. The scent filled every room. Some families added corn. Some swore by a secret spice. Others just dumped everything in and let time do the rest. Served with crackers, cornbread, or a slice of white bread, it was hot, hearty, and endlessly forgiving. Chili was the meal that welcomed leftovers, stretched across days, and tasted better the second time around. It was the comfort food of the working class, fierce, flavorful, and proud. Cube steak with mushroom gravy was tough love on a plate, the kind of dinner that tasted way better than it looked. Cube steak, tenderized into submission with a meat mallet or machine, was pan-fried and then smothered in a thick gravy made from cream of mushroom soup. Sometimes there were fresh mushrooms, sometimes not. It was poured over mashed potatoes, egg noodles, or whatever starch was on hand that night. The meat was cheap, the meal was hearty, and the result was pure stick-to-your-ribs comfort. You did not eat this with a light appetite. You ate it when you were cold, tired, or just in need of something that felt like it had weight. It was not glamorous. The gravy was beige. The meat was thin. But it hit you in the best way, every time. Families made it on repeat because it used pantry staples and kept everyone full. Even if the steak was chewy, the sauce made up for it. Cube steak with mushroom gravy was survival food turned sentimental favorite. It did not try to be trendy. It just made sure you did not leave the table hungry. Turkey croquettes were the second wind of the holiday bird, the part that made all those leftovers feel brand new. After Thanksgiving, when nobody wanted another plain turkey sandwich, farm cooks would mince the leftover meat, stir it into a thick white sauce, season it well, and shape it into little ovals. Those ovals were then breaded and fried until they were crisp and golden on the outside, soft and creamy inside. You could serve them with leftover gravy or cranberry relish if you had some, or just eat them hot from the pan with a fork and a sigh. Croquettes were a way of giving life to scraps. They turned what was left behind into something people actually looked forward to. You could freeze them, reheat them, dress them up or down, but over time they slipped through the cracks. Too old-fashioned, too fiddly, too much work for a weeknight. Today, most people would not even recognize them. Pickled beet salad was a colorful, tangy accompaniment often found on church dinner tables, offering a refreshing contrast to richer main dishes. Made from sliced or diced beets soaked in vinegar and sometimes combined with onions or herbs, this salad was served chilled to awaken the palate. Pickled beet salad was prized not only for its bright appearance, but also for its healthful qualities and long shelf life, making it a reliable choice for congregations preparing meals in advance. The tangy vinegar balanced the natural sweetness of the beets, providing a complex flavor that complemented meat, potatoes, and casseroles. Its presence in old church cookbooks reflects regional preferences, especially in areas where beet cultivation was common. This salad was often part of holiday spreads or regular suppers, contributing both nutrition and variety to communal meals. Pickled beet salad remains a simple yet elegant reminder of how church kitchens balanced practicality with flavor to create memorable dining experiences. Egg gravy over toast was a dish born of hens and hard times. When the pantry was bare but the chickens were laying, farm cooks got creative. They made a simple white gravy with milk, butter, and flour, then stirred in scrambled eggs until the sauce thickened and turned golden. That mixture got poured over slices of toasted bread, biscuits, or whatever was left from the day before. It was creamy, rich, and surprisingly filling, especially for something that barely cost a nickel to make. You could season it with pepper or salt, but not much else. It was not meant to be exciting. It was meant to get you through the day. Farm kids often ate it for supper or breakfast, especially in egg-heavy seasons when there were more yolks than coins. It fell out of fashion because it looked plain and felt poor. But the truth is, egg gravy was practical, protein-packed, and full of care. It was what you made when you had almost nothing and still wanted to put something warm in someone's belly. That kind of love never goes out of style. Chicken paprikash was the creamy, paprika-soaked comfort food that looked like it belonged in a cookbook from across the world, yet found its way into suburban kitchens during the 1980s. Made with bone-in or boneless chicken simmered in a sauce of sour cream, onions, butter, and Hungarian paprika, it had warmth, richness, and depth most weeknight meals could only dream of. Served over egg noodles or rice, it became a hearty, comforting dish that families returned to when they wanted something different but still soothing. The sauce was the star, creamy, orange-red, and smoky from the paprika. It clung to every bite of chicken, every forkful of noodles. It was the kind of dinner that made the whole house smell like someone had been cooking for hours. And sometimes they had. But even the quick versions, using canned broth and pre-cooked chicken, managed to hit the mark. Chicken paprikash felt exotic without being intimidating. It was one of those dishes that proved 1980s home cooks were not afraid to explore old-world flavors with modern-day shortcuts. It was not flashy, but it was soulful. Exactly what you needed on a cold night with nothing but time and a plateful of comfort. Stuffed bell peppers were like little edible packages of hope. Each one stood upright in a baking dish, filled to the brim with a mix of ground beef, white rice, and seasoned tomato sauce. The peppers softened in the oven, turning tender while still holding their shape like proud green soldiers. You cut into one and steam poured out, carrying the scent of garlic, onion, and everything good. Some families added cheese, others kept it plain, but every version was a love letter to thrift and tradition. It was a meal that made you slow down, sit up straight, and savor. Stuffed bell peppers were not a side. They were the whole show. Peach dump cake is the ultimate no-fuss dessert that's perfect for any gathering, especially church potlucks and family picnics. The recipe is as simple as it sounds. Canned peaches, yellow cake mix, and a stick of butter, all dumped into a pan and baked until golden and bubbly. The peaches soften and meld with the cake mix, creating a rich, syrupy base that's both sweet and comforting. The cake mix forms a crumbly topping that's slightly crisp, adding texture to the dish and balancing the softness of the peaches underneath. The best part? It's incredibly easy to make, and yet it tastes like it took much more effort. Peach dump cake is a perfect dessert when you need something quick, delicious, and crowd-pleasing. It's warm, sweet, and always brings a sense of nostalgia, reminding everyone of simpler times when desserts were just as much about convenience as they were about flavor. Whether served on its own or with a scoop of vanilla ice cream, this dessert is a classic. And if you think this is the best way to end a meal, wait until you see the next dish, a casserole that's hearty, flavorful, and incredibly satisfying. In the 1980s and 1990s, when potluck spreads began leaning toward lighter, more sophisticated dishes, almighty almond chicken salad earned its place on the table. This creamy, savory sweet combination of shredded chicken, sliced almonds, juicy grapes, and a touch of mayo was a refined twist on a classic. It brought elegance to any gathering while remaining simple enough to whip up in a home kitchen. What made this salad a standout was its versatility. It could be served in a variety of ways, on a bed of lettuce, as a sandwich filling, or even scooped into hollowed-out melon halves for a fancier presentation. The ingredients were affordable and adaptable. Cooks could swap in walnuts for almonds, yogurt for mayo, or dried cranberries for grapes, tailoring the recipe to suit their pantry or taste. So, why did it disappear? As prepackaged chicken salads flooded grocery stores, the effort of making this dish from scratch lost its appeal for busy households. Additionally, shifting dietary preferences and the move toward leaner, vinaigrette-based salads further edged it out. Few desserts carry the warmth of tradition quite like a baked custard rice pudding. Reverent rice pudding was a staple at church gatherings, offering creamy comfort with a touch of cinnamon spice and the sweetness of raisins. It was the kind of dish that felt like home, evoking memories of simpler times when nothing in the pantry went to waste. Rice pudding's history stretches back centuries, with variations found in nearly every culture that had access to rice and milk. In the United States, it gained popularity during the 19th century, when rice became widely available and recipes emphasized frugality. By the 1970s, baked versions with eggs, milk, and sugar added a custardy richness, while cinnamon and raisins gave it a warm, familiar flavor. It was versatile, too, served as a dessert, a snack, or even a breakfast dish. But as dessert trends shifted in the late 20th century, rice pudding began to fade. Its humble simplicity couldn't compete with the rise of more decadent sweets like chocolate lava cakes or the colorful allure of gelatin desserts. The time-intensive baking process also made it less appealing in an era of quick fixes. Deviled ham sandwiches were the mystery meat spread that always seemed to show up when you needed it most. Canned ham mashed into paste with mayonnaise, mustard, and a little seasoning, spread thick on slices of bread or slapped on crackers. It had a tang, a saltiness, and a weirdly satisfying punch. It didn't look like much, but it tasted like something you could trust. It was never your favorite, but it always showed up when nothing else did. That pinkish paste looked odd, but it stuck to your ribs in all the right ways. No one bragged about deviled ham, but no one threw it away either. In homes without deli meat or fresh cold cuts, this was the sandwich with staying power. It tasted like scraping by, but doing it with a little flavor. Something that came through when the fridge was nearly bare. Deviled ham was survival with a little spice. A sandwich that said, "We're going to be okay," even when things felt anything but. Deviled ham sandwiches were the mystery meat spread that always seemed to show up when you needed it most. Canned ham mashed into paste with mayonnaise, mustard, and a little seasoning, spread thick on slices of bread or slapped on crackers. It had a tang, a saltiness, and a weirdly satisfying punch. It didn't look like much, but it tasted like something you could trust. It was never your favorite, but it always showed up when nothing else did. That pinkish paste looked odd, but it stuck to your ribs in all the right ways. No one bragged about deviled ham, but no one threw it away either. In homes without deli meat or fresh cold cuts, this was the sandwich with staying power. It tasted like scraping by, but doing it with a little flavor. Something that came through when the fridge was nearly bare. Deviled ham was survival with a little spice. A sandwich that said, "We're going to be okay," even when things felt anything but. Potato and egg skillet hash was the end-of-the-week answer to a cluttered fridge and a hungry crew. Leftover boiled potatoes were chopped and tossed into a skillet, crisped up in bacon grease until their edges turned golden and their middles stayed soft. Onions came next, always onions, bringing sweetness and bite. Then came the eggs, scrambled in or laid on top, steaming and golden. Some families added cheese, some tossed in scraps of ham or sausage. But at its heart, this was a dish built on economy and instinct. You used what you had, you worked fast, you fed everyone, and it always tasted better than it had any right to. This was breakfast for supper. It was late nights and early mornings. It was the smell of something frying while boots dried by the door. Now, Hash is something you see on brunch menus, dressed up with hollandaise or avocado, but the real version, the farmhouse version, was much simpler, much better. It was about making something from almost nothing and doing it with care. Swiss steak with tomato gravy was a staple in many community kitchens, valued for its tenderized beef slow-cooked in a rich, tomato-based sauce. The meat was typically pounded or cubed to soften it before simmering gently in a gravy flavored with tomatoes, onions, and seasonings. This method allowed tougher cuts of beef to become tender and flavorful, stretching resources while providing satisfying nourishment. Swiss steak was often accompanied by mashed potatoes or bread to soak up the hearty gravy. It was a dish that reflected the practicality and ingenuity of church cooks who made use of economical ingredients to feed large groups. Its comforting, home-style flavors made it a reliable choice for potlucks, holiday meals, and regular suppers alike, symbolizing the warmth and care at the heart of communal dining traditions. Beef stroganoff took a hard left turn in the 1980s, and nobody was mad about it. The hamburger helper version was the most famous, but even homemade versions started borrowing from that quick and easy formula. Instead of strips of steak, you had ground beef. Instead of slow simmering, you had a one-pan, 15-minute meal. The creamy sauce, made from sour cream and mushroom soup or packet mixes, was poured over wide egg noodles and stirred until it looked just right. Thick, glossy, and beige in that oddly comforting way. It did not pretend to be authentic. It just wanted to get dinner on the table. This was a working parent's dream. Minimal prep, affordable ingredients, and flavor that punched way above its weight. Kids loved it. Adults loved it. Even picky eaters could get behind those silky noodles coated in savory cream. If you grew up in the 1980s, this was the taste of a weeknight. The clink of forks on Corelle plates, the hum of a kitchen lit by a single overhead bulb. It was warm, familiar, and deeply satisfying. Hamburger Helper was a miracle in a box. You added ground beef, water, and a little hope, and 30 minutes later, you had dinner. It came in flavors like cheeseburger macaroni, beef stroganoff, and lasagna, each with their own dusty little packet of magic. It was not gourmet, and it did not pretend to be. But when you were working full-time and raising kids on a threadbare budget, that little box meant everything. It meant one less thing to worry about. It meant your children would go to bed full, and even if they complained, they still cleaned their plates. Hamburger Helper was a symbol of the 70s, convenient, dependable, and proudly unpretentious. It fed millions. It made weekday meals possible. And in doing so, it earned its place in the kitchen cupboards of America. The packaging may have changed, but the memory never does. That skillet on the stove, bubbling with pasta and beef and something that tasted like comfort. It is burned into the memory like a family photo. Pineapple cheese casserole is one of those dishes that seems a bit strange at first, but once you take that first bite, you'll be hooked. The sweet, tangy pineapple chunks pair surprisingly well with the sharp, savory cheddar cheese, creating a perfect blend of sweet and savory that you didn't know you needed. Often served as a side dish, this casserole combines the richness of cheese with the brightness of pineapple, making it a unique and flavorful addition to any meal. Whether served alongside ham or roasted chicken, pineapple cheese casserole always stood out at church potlucks for its ability to balance flavors that normally wouldn't go together. It's sweet, it's cheesy, and it's downright delicious. And as surprising as this dish may seem, there's another salad coming up that layers together ingredients in a way that you won't want to miss. Get ready for a dish that will bring even more excitement to the table. In the days when church picnics were synonymous with indulgent homemade treats, faithful fried apple rings brought a touch of carnival-style fun to the table. This simple yet delicious dessert featured crisp apple slices, dipped in a light batter, fried until golden, and finished with a dusting of cinnamon sugar. The result was a warm, sweet, and slightly tangy bite that captured the essence of autumn, no matter the season. The practicality of this recipe made it a frequent guest at gatherings. Apples were affordable, widely available, and easy to work with, while the batter could be whisked together using basic pantry ingredients. Fried apple rings were also incredibly versatile. They worked as a dessert, a snack, or even a breakfast treat alongside coffee, and their individual portions made them ideal for sharing, with no forks or plates required. So, why don't we see these anymore? Frying, once a common cooking method, has fallen out of favor due to health concerns and the labor-intensive nature of the process. Add to that the rise of prepackaged apple snacks and desserts, and these homemade treats began to fade. In the world of comfort desserts, few could match the magic of a self-saucing, virtuous vanilla pudding cake. This clever dish baked into two distinct layers, a fluffy vanilla cake on top and a rich, warm pudding underneath. Simple, satisfying, and slightly mysterious, it was a favorite at church potlucks where ingenuity and indulgence often went hand in hand. Self-saucing cakes date back to the early 20th century, gaining popularity during the Great Depression when frugality was key. By the 1970s, the vanilla variation became a staple of community cookbooks, praised for turning pantry basics, flour, sugar, milk, and eggs, into something that felt both luxurious and homemade. Its practicality was unbeatable: minimal ingredients, no frosting needed, and a built-in sauce that made it feel like two desserts in one. But as dessert trends grew more elaborate in the 1980s and beyond, this humble cake struggled to keep up. The rise of rich layer cakes, cheesecakes, and decorative confections made its understated appearance less appealing. Additionally, the convenience of boxed cake mixes overshadowed the charm of from-scratch baking. Chicken and gnocchi. Bake was a creamy casserole that combined tender pieces of chicken with pillowy gnocchi in a rich sauce, often flavored with garlic, herbs, and cheese. This dish brought a touch of Italian comfort food to church suppers, appealing to those looking for warm, filling meals that stretched both protein and starch. The gnocchi provided a soft, satisfying texture that paired well with the chicken and velvety sauce, creating a balanced and hearty entree. Chicken and gnocchi bake was easy to prepare ahead of time and could be baked just before serving large groups, making it a practical choice for busy church kitchens. Its appeal lay in combining familiar ingredients in a new, indulgent way, showing how congregations embraced evolving food trends while honoring traditional values of sharing and hospitality. The dish's creamy richness made it especially popular during cooler months when congregations sought comfort and nourishment in their meals. Goulash with elbow macaroni was the meal you made when money was tight, but you still wanted something hot, filling, and deeply familiar. Ground beef was browned with onions and maybe some garlic, then stewed with canned tomatoes or tomato sauce. In went the elbow macaroni, cooked just soft enough to soak up the flavor. Sometimes a splash of Worcestershire, sometimes a bit of cheese. In the South, it was called American chop suey. In the Midwest, it was just goulash. In rougher times, folks called it slumgullion. Whatever the name, it did the job. One pot, no fuss, plenty of leftovers. It filled up children and kept lunch boxes stocked for the next day. You did not need a recipe, just the memory of how your mother or grandmother made it. It was the kind of meal you could eat straight from the pan, standing barefoot in the kitchen. These days, goulash has been dressed up or disappeared, replaced with flashier pasta bakes and frozen options. But it used to mean something. It meant there would be enough to go around. And that mattered. Teriyaki chicken with minute rice was weeknight takeout without the takeout bag. Soy sauce, brown sugar, garlic, and pineapple juice turned simple chicken into a sticky sweet masterpiece. It was cooked in a skillet or electric wok, poured over hot, fluffy minute rice, and eaten straight from the plate while steam curled into the kitchen light. It felt exotic back then, sweet, salty, and just a little tangy. Teriyaki was not yet everywhere, so having it at home felt like a treat. Bottled marinades were popular, but homemade versions became kitchen staples too. Families made it with chicken breasts or thighs, depending on what was in the freezer. Pineapple chunks were often tossed in for extra sweetness. It was not just fast, it was festive. You got a colorful plate, an easy cleanup, and a dinner that actually made you smile. It looked glossy, smelled amazing, and made your weeknight feel a little more like a celebration. Teriyaki chicken with minute rice was fusion without realizing it. It gave American families a taste of something new, dressed up in ingredients they already knew how to use. It was sweet, it was easy, and it was too good to forget. Fish sticks and tartar sauce made Friday night dinners feel almost like a celebration. Pulled from the freezer and laid out on a metal tray, they were golden, breaded promises of a meal that was both easy and somehow still special. These were not fresh catches or ocean delicacies. They were chopped white fish, frozen solid, and ready in 20 minutes. And they were perfect. Because they were familiar. Because they were dependable. That crunch when you bit in, followed by the soft, steamy center, was as comforting as any casserole. You dipped them in tartar sauce, maybe from a jar, maybe homemade with mayo and pickles, and suddenly dinner felt whole. There might be canned peas on the side or a scoop of macaroni and cheese, and together it all made sense. Fish sticks were the great equalizer. Rich or poor, city or country, they showed up in everyone's kitchens. Parents loved them because they were quick. Kids loved them because they were crispy. And somewhere in the middle, we all came to see them as more than just a convenience food. They were the shortcut to a meal that worked. And in a decade where time and money were always short, that meant everything. Tuna noodle casserole with crushed chips was the ultimate budget-friendly, pantry-stretching weeknight meal that saved many busy families. Made with canned tuna, noodles, and a creamy sauce, this dish was easy to assemble and always satisfying. The real magic came with the topping, crushed potato chips sprinkled over the casserole, giving it that perfect crunch that made every bite so delicious. It's the kind of dish that's simple but never boring, offering a comforting blend of flavors that everyone could enjoy. This casserole was a go-to for busy parents who wanted a meal that could feed a crowd without breaking the bank. It's a meal that's been passed down through the years, often showing up at church events and potlucks. And while this casserole might be the perfect weeknight dinner, there's a sweet, creamy salad coming next that will add a touch of magic to any table. Stay tuned for the next nostalgic favorite. Stuffed bell peppers were the kind of dish that made you feel like someone had tried. The bell peppers were hollowed out like tiny edible bowls and filled with a mix of ground beef, white rice, tomato sauce, onions, and a good handful of shredded cheddar cheese. They were lined up in a baking dish, covered with foil, and baked until everything was soft, steamy, and melted together. The peppers themselves went tender, almost sweet, and their edges browned just enough to feel special. It was one of those meals where the plate did all the work: meat, veg, starch, and cheese in one tidy package. You did not need a side dish. You barely needed silverware. Some people made theirs spicy. Some added Italian seasoning or swapped in turkey. But the soul of the dish was always the same. It was about making the most of what you had, about stretching a little ground meat into something that looked like more. In the 1980s, this was a dinner that meant you had taken the time, even when the truth was you whipped it up with leftovers. Stuffed bell peppers were edible proof that care could be baked into something simple. Macaroni and tomatoes was the kind of dish that could only have been born in hardship and stayed around because it was loved. There was nothing glamorous about it. Elbow macaroni boiled until soft, then stirred into stewed tomatoes with a generous knob of butter, salt, pepper, and not much else. But somehow it worked. Somehow it was enough. This was a meal that made you sit still. A meal that smelled like your grandmother's stove and tasted like every dinner you never thought to miss until now. In some homes, it was Sunday supper. In others, it was Monday's leftovers made new. It was comfort food that never got called that back then. Just, what's for dinner? White bread on the side was almost guaranteed, the kind that left crumbs on the table and stuck to the roof of your mouth. You might add a bit of cheese if you were lucky, but the original was humble. This was not about flavor explosions or recipe perfection. It was about sitting around a table and being fed, being full, being together. And in that simplicity, there was a kind of magic you cannot buy now, even if you tried. Scrapple supper was not fancy, but it was unforgettable. Made from pork scraps, cornmeal, and spices, scrapple was a way to use every last bit of the hog, from snout to tail. The mixture was cooked into a thick mush, poured into a loaf pan, chilled until firm, and then sliced and pan-fried until golden and crisp on the outside. Some families served it with stewed apples, others with eggs or just a dab of molasses. It was especially popular in Pennsylvania Dutch country, but it traveled farther than people think. Farmers loved it because it was cheap, filling, and made in big batches. Kids either loved it or hated it, but they always remembered it. Scrapple was a symbol of resourcefulness, of using what you had, of honoring every part of the animal. But now it barely exists outside of specialty markets. It is too rustic, too real, too old-fashioned for modern tastes. But if you ever get a slice cooked just right, crusty on the edges, soft inside, you will understand why it mattered. It was not just dinner, it was tradition, fried up in a cast-iron pan. Rye bread dressing was a beloved savory side often featured in church cookbooks, reflecting regional traditions where rye bread was a staple. Unlike typical white bread dressings, this version utilized the dense, flavorful rye bread combined with fresh herbs such as sage and thyme, vegetables, and a rich broth to moisten the mixture. The dressing was baked until it developed a crisp golden crust on top while remaining moist inside, delivering a complex taste that balanced earthiness and herbaceous notes. It was a dish that carried the spirit of home and hearth, frequently served alongside roasted meats during holiday suppers or community feasts. Rye bread dressing was also prized for its heartiness and ability to absorb flavors, making it a favorite in congregations with Northern European roots. In many church kitchens, this dressing was more than a side. It was a highlight, sometimes made in large batches to share with neighbors and families. The recipe stood as a delicious example of how simple ingredients could create memorable and meaningful dishes in communal settings. Mock duck loaf was a staple in many church kitchens when meat was either too expensive or unavailable. Made primarily from textured vegetable protein or seasoned gluten, this loaf was a clever vegetarian alternative that gave congregations a sense of indulgence without breaking budgets. The loaf was carefully seasoned with herbs, spices, and sometimes a splash of Worcestershire sauce to mimic the savory flavors of traditional meatloaf. Its texture was firm but tender, easily sliced for serving alongside mashed potatoes or green beans. While it might sound simple today, back then this dish was revolutionary in offering a meatless main course that could still satisfy hearty appetites. Its popularity grew in times when rationing was common or during Lent when meatless meals were a religious requirement. Church groups often took pride in perfecting their version, sometimes adding a tomato-based glaze on top or folding in bits of nuts and vegetables to add texture and nutrition. This loaf was as much about community spirit as it was about sustenance, a dish that brought people together to enjoy a meal without excess, reflecting the values of thrift and fellowship. Even today, some old church cookbooks treasure this recipe as a reminder of simpler, resourceful times. Ham hocks and beans was more than food. It was a full day's aroma filling the kitchen. You started in the morning with a pot of dry pinto beans, soaked overnight and drained. Then came the ham hock, salty and fatty, dropped in whole to flavor the water as it boiled. That pot would simmer for hours, filling the house with the smell of something real cooking. Not fast, not fancy, just true. As the beans softened and the meat fell off the bone, everything thickened into a kind of stew. Some families added onions, others added garlic or bay leaves. It all depended on what you had and how your mother taught you. Served with cornbread, usually skillet-baked, it was a full meal. No garnish, no fuss, just ladled into a bowl and handed to you with a smile or a tired sigh. It was the kind of meal that made you feel full, warm, and taken care of. But ham hocks are harder to find now, and most people do not have 6 hours to stir a pot. So this dish lives in memory and smell, a warm, smoky echo from a time when dinner started at sunrise. Tuna noodle casserole was either your favorite or your nightmare, but either way, it showed up often and meant you were home. The formula never changed. Egg noodles, canned tuna, frozen peas, and cream of mushroom soup all stirred together and baked until hot and thick. The finishing move? a crunchy crown of crushed potato chips, sometimes cornflakes, always something salty and golden. It came in a square dish that seemed bottomless. You would scoop out a portion and find yourself going back for more because it was weirdly addictive. Cheap, filling, and shelf-stable, it became the undisputed champion of weeknight meals for families trying to stretch a dollar. Some versions added chopped celery or onion. Others stayed true to the original, built on cans and carbs. It was a casserole that smelled like your grandmother's house. It could feed a family of 6 on pennies. And it tasted like a relic of a time when everything came from the pantry and nobody cared if the tuna was fancy. Chipped beef on toast was not just food, it was survival dressed in a white sauce. They called it creamed chipped beef, or sometimes just SOS, a nickname too crude to repeat in polite company, but everybody knew it. Born on military bases and carried home in memory, it found its place in working-class kitchens across America. Dried beef from a jar, thick white gravy made from flour and milk, poured over stale toast and served like it was a blessing. Because in many homes, it was. The beef was thin and salty, not exactly tender, but when you had little else, it felt rich. That sauce was a small luxury, thickened by a whisk and a mother's tired hands. There was something defiant about it, a meal that refused to disappear even when money did. It fed factory workers and school children, it showed up at breakfast and dinner, and always said, "This is enough." There were no secrets, no frills, just a dish that got the job done. And yet, in its simplicity, there was care, a kind of military honesty, a no-nonsense meal in a no-nonsense time. Even if you hated it, you remembered it. And sometimes, that is the most honest kind of nostalgia there is. Cornbread pudding, the perfect hybrid of savory and sweet, takes cornbread to a whole new level. This casserole-style dish features a custardy texture, with the comforting cornbread flavor acting as a base. Whether you're serving it as a side dish or a dessert, it's versatile enough to fit in any meal. Some versions are made with a rich, buttery sauce that soaks into the cornbread, adding depth to the flavor. Others might include a touch of sweetness, thanks to ingredients like brown sugar or maple syrup, creating a delightful balance of flavors. It's the kind of dish that's perfect for big gatherings, offering a taste of home and nostalgia with each bite. And just when you think this is the perfect combination of textures, there's a dish waiting to take comfort food to the next level. Stay tuned for the next unforgettable recipe. Eggplant Parmesan casserole made its way into church suppers as a hearty, satisfying dish that stood apart from the usual potluck fare. While today it is a beloved classic, back then it was less common and somewhat exotic, lending an air of novelty to community meals. The casserole was built with layers of breaded fried eggplant slices, rich tomato sauce, and generous amounts of cheese such as mozzarella and parmesan. Baked until bubbly and golden, it offered a perfect balance of textures and flavors that appealed to both vegetarians and meat-eaters alike. This dish was especially popular in churches with Italian or Mediterranean heritage, reflecting regional tastes brought by immigrant communities. Its preparation required time and care, making it a dish often reserved for special gatherings or holiday dinners. The casserole was as much about celebration as it was about sharing, a dish that showcased creativity and the joy of communal cooking. Over time, it became a symbol of comfort and hospitality, bridging cultural divides through food. Today, it remains a reminder of how churches embraced diverse cuisines and adapted them into their own traditions. Cornmeal mush with milk gravy was humble food, but it carried weight. It started as a soft porridge cooked slow on the stovetop, just cornmeal and water stirred until thick. Once firm, it was poured into a loaf pan and chilled until solid. The next day, you sliced it like bread and fried each piece in bacon drippings or lard until it had a golden crust. That alone could be supper. But the real magic was the milk gravy, white, peppery, and poured hot over the crispy slices. It was simple, filling, and cheap. Cornmeal was always available. Milk and fat came from the farm, and when meat was scarce, this was how you made a plate that felt complete. It stuck to your ribs. It warmed you up. and it reminded you that comfort did not have to cost much. It was eaten in silence sometimes, with steam rising off tin plates and the day's work still on your clothes. For those who knew it, cornmeal mush was a quiet kind of good that did not ask for attention. Hamburger pie, also known as shepherd's pie in its Americanized form, was one of those dishes that came from scraps and turned into gold. It started with a layer of seasoned ground beef, sometimes with onions or gravy, sometimes just straight from the pan. Then came the creamy corn, usually from a can, poured right over the top like it belonged there. The final touch was a thick layer of mashed potatoes, piped on or spooned roughly, spread edge to edge. Some people topped it with shredded cheddar, others left it plain. It baked until the potatoes browned at the edges and the whole thing bubbled at the seams. It was a one-dish wonder, Midwestern, humble, and filling in every way. If your family had hamburger pie in the oven, you knew you were in for something warm and grounding. It was never flashy, but it always delivered. It was especially great for stretching ingredients and feeding a family on a tight budget. The layers came together in a forkful that tasted like every corner of the plate at once. Hamburger pie, also known as shepherd's pie in its Americanized form, was one of those dishes that came from scraps and turned into gold. It started with a layer of seasoned ground beef, sometimes with onions or gravy, sometimes just straight from the pan. Then came the creamy corn, usually from a can, poured right over the top like it belonged there. The final touch was a thick layer of mashed potatoes, piped on or spooned roughly, spread edge to edge. Some people topped it with shredded cheddar, others left it plain. It baked until the potatoes browned at the edges and the whole thing bubbled at the seams. It was a one-dish wonder, Midwestern, humble, and filling in every way. If your family had hamburger pie in the oven, you knew you were in for something warm and grounding. It was never flashy, but it always delivered. It was especially great for stretching ingredients and feeding a family on a tight budget. The layers came together in a forkful that tasted like every corner of the plate at once. Tomato aspic is one of those dishes that many people have strong feelings about. Either you loved it or you dreaded seeing it on the table. A savory gelatin mold made with tomato juice, celery, and spices, tomato aspic is a dish that was often served at church luncheons and family gatherings. The texture of the gelatin, combined with the sharpness of the tomato and the subtle crunch of celery, made for a unique flavor profile that was often polarizing. Yet, for those who appreciated it, tomato aspic was an elegant way to serve a chilled side dish that felt just a little fancier than a typical salad. It might have been a bit of a hard sell at first glance, but once people started eating it, they understood its appeal. If you can appreciate the charm of this quirky dish, you're going to love the next sweet and creamy salad that brings a whole new meaning to the word heavenly. Ham and cheese sliders were mini sandwiches baked together with mustard and melted cheese, making them perfect for communal meals and casual church gatherings. These bite-sized sliders combined tender ham slices with sharp or mild cheese inside soft rolls, brushed with a mustard or butter glaze before baking. The result was a warm, gooey, and flavorful snack that could easily be served buffet-style to large groups. Ham and cheese sliders were popular because they were easy to prepare, transport, and share, fitting well with the social nature of church potlucks and socials. They provided a satisfying balance of protein and carbs in a convenient format, encouraging fellowship through food. This dish remains a nostalgic favorite, symbolizing the welcoming atmosphere and shared joy characteristic of church community meals. Chicken divan was the queen of creamy casseroles, a dish that somehow made broccoli feel like a luxury. Families would pile cooked chicken and steamed broccoli into a baking dish, then drown it in a sauce made from cream of chicken soup, a splash of sherry, and a heaping handful of shredded cheddar. It was finished with golden breadcrumbs and baked until bubbling. The name made it sound fancy, but it was pure 1980s comfort food, easy, affordable, and surprisingly rich. It could be made ahead of time, frozen, or doubled for potlucks. If your mother was trying to impress dinner guests without working too hard, this was what she made. Kids might have rolled their eyes at the broccoli, But by the second bite, nobody was complaining. The creaminess covered everything. Even if you hated vegetables, you liked this. It was the dish that made your mother feel like she was serving fine dining even when it came out of a can. Old-fashioned salmon patties came straight from the pantry because canned salmon was always on the shelf, even when fresh fish was a luxury. You mixed it with crushed saltines, chopped onions, eggs, and a bit of pepper. Formed into patties and fried in a hot skillet with lard or bacon grease, they crisped up golden brown with a soft, flaky center. Served with creamed peas, stewed tomatoes, or boiled potatoes, salmon patties were a full meal that cost next to nothing. They were especially common in Lent or on Fridays when meat was off the menu. Kids loved them. Adults appreciated how far one can of salmon could go. And in many farm homes, they showed up regularly, an easy solution when time and groceries were both in short supply. Over time, salmon patties fell away. Canned fish lost its charm. But these patties were clever cooking, stretching a can into a meal that fed 5. They deserve to be remembered. Creamed chipped beef on toast without beef was a clever adaptation of a classic budget-conscious dish in church kitchens that needed to stretch ingredients. Instead of using expensive or scarce dried beef, cooks substituted mushrooms or other vegetables to create a creamy, savory sauce served over toast. The mushrooms were finely chopped and sautéed to mimic the texture of chipped beef, then simmered in a white sauce made with milk and a hint of seasoning. This variation was especially popular during times of economic hardship or meat rationing, proving that flavor and comfort could be maintained even with limited resources. The creamy sauce clung perfectly to toasted bread, offering a filling and warm meal that was easy to prepare in large quantities. It was the kind of dish that spoke to practicality without sacrificing taste, a common theme in church cooking where communal meals needed to feed many with simple ingredients. This dish was a testament to the ingenuity of home cooks who found ways to honor tradition while adjusting to their realities. Ham and apple casserole was the kind of dish that smelled like October evenings and sounded like supper bells. Farm families knew the value of leftovers, and this sweet and savory bake turned ham scraps and orchard apples into something that felt warm all the way through. Thin slices of fresh apple layered over thick-cut ham, onions tucked in between, and a sprinkle of sage or thyme gave it that farmhouse flavor. The whole thing was finished with a crust of buttered breadcrumbs and baked until bubbling. It was not fancy, it was not expensive, but it was everything a meal needed to be: satisfying, simple, and seasoned with memory. It was especially common after a big ham roast earlier in the week. Leftovers were never just leftovers, they were the second act. Sometimes cheddar cheese was added, sometimes potatoes, but the core of the dish was always the same: salt, sweet, warmth, and thrift. You could feed a big family for next to nothing and still have enough for tomorrow's lunch. Taco salad in a Doritos bag was the definition of fun food, half salad, half chaos, and all 1980s genius. The setup was simple: ground beef cooked with taco seasoning, shredded lettuce, cheddar cheese, maybe some diced tomatoes or sour cream, and a big handful of nacho cheese Doritos. Some families mixed it all in a bowl. Others, the bold ones, served it straight from the bag. You would crunch up the chips, pour in the toppings, shake it up, and dig in with a fork. It was portable. It was messy. It was delicious. And it felt like breaking the rules in the best way. This was dinner that did not sit properly on a plate. It made kids excited to eat salad. It gave busy parents a break. And it tasted like everything good about the 1980s. Salty, cheesy, just a little bit ridiculous. You could call it a meal, a snack, or a party trick. But however it showed up, it never lasted long. Taco salad in a Doritos bag was food with a wink. In the quiet chaos of the 1970s, when paychecks stretched thin and every dime had a destiny, tuna noodle casserole was the supper that never let you down. This was not the kind of food that bragged, but it stuck to your ribs and stayed in your memory. Picture a kitchen lit by a single bulb, children laughing in the living room, and the smell of tuna noodle casserole wrapping itself around the house like a worn wool blanket. Back then, canned tuna was cheap and dependable, a protein that did not ask for much. Egg noodles, buttery and familiar, filled the plate with a softness that reminded you that not everything in the world had to be hard. And cream of mushroom soup, thick, salty, dependable, held it all together like a family secret passed down in whispers. You might top it with crushed potato chips if you had them, but even without, the taste brought a strange sense of comfort, like the world outside could wait a little longer. Nobody called it fancy, but it showed up again and again, a quiet testimony to survival and stubborn joy. In homes where fathers came home late from second shifts and mothers made magic with half a pantry, this was the meal that asked for nothing but gave you everything. That casserole dish, faded from years of use, carried more than just food. It carried love you could eat with a spoon. The 7-Up salad mold is one of those dishes that screams retro comfort. Picture it, a lime gelatin base that sets into a vibrant green, then layered with pineapple, cottage cheese, and topped off with lemon-lime soda. The bubbles from the soda bring a unique fizz that perfectly balances the sweetness of the fruit and the richness of the cheese. Often served chilled, this dish was a church staple for potlucks, family reunions, and holiday gatherings, bringing an unexpected burst of flavor to the table. It might sound a little strange at first, but trust us, once you try it, you'll understand why it disappeared so quickly at every gathering. And speaking of comfort, there's another dish that was just as beloved for its creamy goodness and warmth. Stay tuned for the dish that's known to make any grieving heart feel just a little better. Depression meatloaf was the kind of meal that told you how to survive without ever saying a word. You took a little bit of ground meat, beef, pork, or whatever you could find, and stretched it with oats, breadcrumbs, eggs, and onions. Some people added shredded carrots. Others used mashed beans. It was not about taste so much as getting food on the table. You mixed it all together, packed it into a loaf pan, and baked it until the top crusted over and the smell told you it was done. It was often topped with ketchup or brown sugar, but never anything fancy. You served it with boiled potatoes or canned vegetables, and you did not complain. This meatloaf was a lifeline during hard times. It showed up on tables across the country, not because people loved it, but because it worked. And over time, people did grow to love it, not just for the flavor, but for what it meant. A full stomach, a quiet evening, a family sitting down together. Baked macaroni with liver and onions without onions was an altered version of a classic casserole, maintaining the original's rich flavor while adapting to the tastes of larger groups. The dish combined tender pieces of liver with cooked macaroni and a creamy or tomato-based sauce, baked until bubbling and golden on top. Removing onions made it more palatable for congregations sensitive to strong flavors or textures. This casserole provided an economical way to include nutrient-rich liver in meals, often stretching limited supplies to feed many. It was a practical, yet flavorful dish found in many old church cookbooks, showcasing the creativity of home cooks, balancing tradition and taste. Its hearty nature made it a satisfying option for colder months and gatherings, representing a culinary bridge between old-world recipes and American community dining. Fried bologna and potatoes was not glamorous, but it hit the spot in ways few meals could. Thick slices of bologna sizzled in a cast-iron skillet, curling at the edges and releasing a salty, smoky aroma that signaled supper was almost ready. Diced potatoes joined the pan, crisping up in the rendered fat, sometimes with onions, sometimes with just salt and pepper. It was quick, filling, and dirt cheap. 3 things every farmhouse cook needed. Kids loved it because it was salty and familiar. Grown-ups loved it because it was fast. There were no fancy spices, no fancy techniques, just pantry staples and a hot pan. This was often a last-minute meal, thrown together after chores when time was short and the cupboard was thin. Today, fried bologna gets mocked or ignored, but for many, it was a taste of home. It proved that even the most basic ingredients could turn into something deeply comforting. It did not need to be pretty. It just needed to be hot, salty, and enough to fill a plate. Lasagna with cottage cheese was the Italian-American supper shortcut that fed every crowd and saved every budget. Ricotta was pricey. Cottage cheese? way cheaper, and almost always in the fridge, so families layered noodles, red sauce, ground beef, mozzarella, and cottage cheese into thick trays that baked into gooey, bubbling comfort. It was tangier than traditional lasagna, lighter in texture, and surprisingly addictive. The edges would get crispy, the middle would be molten, and the smell could drag anyone out of their bedroom and into the kitchen. Some people swore it was better than the real thing. Others would never admit they used cottage cheese, even if they loved the taste. But in the 1980s, this was the go-to lasagna for busy households that needed big flavor on a tight budget. It showed up at birthday parties, neighborhood potlucks, and Sunday dinners. It was easy to double, easy to freeze, and easy to love. Chicken and dumplings was the closest a meal ever got to a warm hug. It started with a broth, rich and savory, bubbling with tender bits of chicken. Then came the dumplings, soft, doughy, clouds that soaked up every drop of flavor like they were made for it. And maybe they were. Maybe they were made to carry the weight of tired hands and empty wallets. This dish was not about precision. It was about patience. It was about stirring slowly, seasoning carefully, and trusting that flour and fat and a little time could feed a family of 5. It filled the kitchen with steam and the house with peace. And in a time when peace was hard to come by, that mattered more than anything. You did not need fresh herbs or fine china, just a pot, a ladle, and people to serve. Chicken and dumplings said, everything is going to be okay, even when it was not. And maybe that is why we still crave it, even now. Pink fluff salad is a dish that never fails to evoke memories of church potlucks, family picnics, and holiday celebrations. It's a dessert disguised as a salad, but don't let that fool you. It's all sweetness and fun. The dish combines Cool Whip, cherry pie filling, crushed pineapple, and marshmallows, creating a fluffy, creamy texture that's as fun to eat as it is to look at. It's a delightful pink color that's as cheerful as it is delicious, and it's the kind of dish you always look forward to at church functions. Despite its sugary nature, pink fluff salad has a certain lightness to it, making it the perfect end to a meal, or even a snack all on its own. It's a nostalgic classic that's been passed down through generations. And speaking of dishes that bring joy to any table, there's one more beloved recipe that pairs perfectly with your next meal. Coming up next, a dish that combines savory with sweet in the most unexpected way. Turkey tetrazzini was the casserole that came to the rescue after every major holiday, when your fridge was full of turkey but nobody wanted another sandwich. It started with chopped leftover turkey, cooked spaghetti noodles, and a creamy sauce made from butter, broth, and sometimes cream of mushroom soup. Toss in some peas, maybe a few mushrooms, and top it all with a scattering of breadcrumbs or shredded cheese. Into the oven it went, baking into a golden, bubbly casserole that felt nothing like leftovers. It turned scraps into supper. It made the most of what you had and made it feel like a new meal altogether. Some families made it from scratch. Others relied on shortcuts. But the result was the same, something warm, rich, and totally satisfying. Turkey tetrazzini did not try to be trendy. It just tried to make your holiday leftovers go a little farther, and in that, it succeeded beautifully. It was one of those dishes that you only remembered after Thanksgiving, but once it hit the table, it felt like it had always been part of the plan. Sausage gravy and fried cornmeal cakes showed up when flour was scarce, but hunger was not. Instead of biscuits, cooks made small rounds of cornmeal batter, fried on a skillet until crisp on the outside and soft inside. These cakes, also called hoe cakes or Johnny cakes, were perfect for soaking up gravy. The sausage was browned and crumbled, the fat turned into a roux, and milk added to make a thick, peppery white gravy. Ladled over the cornmeal cakes, it became a meal that stuck with you. It was hearty, salty, and deeply satisfying. People made it when flour ran low or when they just wanted something different. It was breakfast for supper, or supper pretending to be breakfast. Either way, it was a crowd pleaser. These days, most people do not fry cornmeal cakes. They use canned biscuits or skip the gravy altogether, but this old combination was born of thrift and full of flavor, and it still deserves a place at the table. Pork and sauerkraut bake was a hearty dish steeped in the culinary traditions of immigrant church communities, especially those of German and Eastern European descent. Combining tender pork with tangy, fermented sauerkraut, this bake balanced rich, savory flavors with a pleasant sourness that helped brighten the palate. The dish was often prepared in large casseroles, making it ideal for feeding sizable congregations at church suppers or holiday events. Sauerkraut, prized for its long shelf life and probiotic benefits, was a staple in many pantries and added a nutritional punch to what might otherwise be a heavy meat dish. The pork was typically slow-cooked until it was tender enough to fall apart, allowing its juices to mingle deeply with the sauerkraut. The bake often included simple seasonings like caraway seeds or onions to enhance the flavor. This dish was more than a meal. It was a symbol of cultural heritage and shared history. Its enduring presence in old church cookbooks shows how food carried stories of migration, faith, and community through generations. Liver and onions with gravy was once a badge of practicality. It was the meal that showed you could stretch $1 without sacrificing nourishment. Liver was cheap, it was packed with iron and vitamins, and when meat was scarce or the budget tight, it was the cut that kept you going. Sliced thin and pan-fried in bacon grease or lard, it was then topped with slow-cooked onions and a rich brown gravy that made the whole kitchen smell like dinner time. Farm kids grew up eating it, like it or not. There was no picking around it. You cleaned your plate because tomorrow's supper was not promised. Served with mashed potatoes or thick slices of white bread, it filled your belly and reminded you how strong flavors could be. The bitterness of liver, the sweetness of onions, the depth of that skillet gravy. It was never anyone's favorite dish, but it was respected. It was part of the rhythm of farmhouse life. And now, it has practically disappeared. But there was a time when this dish put strength in your arms and heat in your belly. Spaghetti with Italian sausage was how pasta night grew up in the 1980s. It was a step above plain marinara, a little richer, a little more rustic. Italian sausage, mild or spicy, was browned and broken up into chunky pieces, then simmered in red sauce until every bite was soaked in flavor. The sauce took on the fennel and garlic from the meat. It clung to the spaghetti like it belonged there. This was not a kid's dinner. It was messy, bold, and made you want to mop the plate with a piece of bread when it was done. Parmesan on top was a must. Sometimes fresh basil, if you were lucky. It was hearty enough to count as a full meal, no side dishes needed. Parents loved it because it was quick and satisfying. Teenagers loved it because it tasted like something you would order at a restaurant. Even if you used jarred sauce and boxed noodles, the sausage made it feel special. This was dinner that made noise, from the sizzle of the pan to the scrape of forks at the end. Spaghetti with Italian sausage was not just food, it was the soundtrack of real family meals. Beef stroganoff felt like a peek into something fancy, even when made on a shoestring budget. The idea of it, tender beef in a creamy mushroom sauce over buttery egg noodles, sounded like something you would get in a restaurant, not a cramped kitchen with dollar store pots. But the magic of the 1970s was making elegance out of limitations. Families used the cheapest cuts of beef, browned quickly in a pan, then smothered them in condensed mushroom soup or sour cream. The sauce would bubble thick, cling to every noodle, and carry that rich umami flavor that made your shoulders drop after the first bite. It was hearty without being heavy, creamy without being complicated. Sometimes you added onions, sometimes paprika, but mostly you kept it simple. This was not a dinner you rushed. You made it on nights when you wanted to pretend a little. Pretend you were somewhere else. Pretend you had more. And in that pretense, you created something real: comfort, satisfaction, and the quiet joy of knowing you had made something out of almost nothing. Velveeta cheese soup is the epitome of comfort food, especially during the colder months when the chill seems to settle in and linger. This velvety, creamy soup was often served in simple coffee mugs during midweek church services, bringing warmth and satisfaction to anyone who walked through those church doors. Made with Velveeta cheese, a staple in many church kitchens, This soup has a smooth, indulgent texture that melts in your mouth with every spoonful. It's a no-fuss recipe that's packed with flavor, perfect for feeding a crowd on a budget. The cheesy richness is complemented by the occasional splash of milk or broth, making it a cozy meal for anyone who needed a pick-me-up in the middle of the week. And while this soup was always a hit, there's another dish that takes its tangy twist and adds a whole new layer of flavor. Stay tuned to discover the next surprising recipe. Chicken divan casserole was a mid-century potluck favorite that found a special place in church supper traditions. This creamy casserole combined tender-cooked chicken with broccoli florets, all smothered in a rich cheese sauce before being baked to perfection. Its appeal lay in its comforting blend of protein and vegetables, making it both filling and nourishing. The dish often included ingredients like mayonnaise or cream of mushroom soup to achieve the desired creaminess, showcasing the popular convenience foods of the time. Chicken divan was especially popular in community meals because it could be made ahead and served warm or at room temperature, ideal for large groups. The casserole reflected a shift towards more elaborate dishes in church cookbooks, incorporating newer food products while still emphasizing affordability and shareability. Its widespread popularity made it a staple on church tables across America, symbolizing the growing influence of convenience cooking blended with traditional values of hospitality and fellowship. Chicken and cornbread pie was more than just supper. It was the kind of meal that ended a long Sunday with something soft, savory, and golden. Farmhouse kitchens would boil a whole chicken earlier in the day using every part, then shred the meat into a bubbling gravy thickened with milk and flour. That creamy chicken base would get poured into a cast-iron skillet where it waited for its crown. And that crown was cornbread, sweet, thick, and poured on top like batter, not like dough. It baked into a golden crust, crackling on the edges, soft in the center, soaking up every drop of the savory filling underneath. This was comfort food made from scratch, from chickens raised in the backyard and cornmeal ground just a county over. It was common to serve this pie at the end of the week when leftovers were thin and you needed something filling. It disappeared not because it was bad, but because it took time. You had to make the gravy, boil the bird, bake it just right, and that kind of patience has gone out of style. Salisbury steak TV dinners were the one microwave meal that felt like a real supper, at least through the eyes of a hungry kid. The beef patties were tenderish, floating in thick brown gravy next to a scoop of mashed potatoes and a rectangle of corn. Sometimes there was a brownie hiding in the corner. It was a plastic tray of small comforts. The sound of that plastic film peeling back after the microwave dinged was almost ceremonial. You sat cross-legged on the carpet, TV glowing, fork in hand. The meat may have been spongy and the potatoes from a powder, but in the moment, it tasted like everything you needed. This was independence for a generation raised on fast solutions. Your parents were busy, you were hungry, and this box from the freezer aisle gave you a meal and a few minutes of peace. The packaging always promised home style, but really, it was its own thing. Sloppy Joes never asked for permission to be messy. They just were. And in that mess, saucy, sweet, tangy, and served on soft hamburger buns, you found the kind of joy that only kids with stained shirts and sauce-covered faces really understood. These sandwiches were the chaos of childhood, the fast fix after a long day, the supper that did not care about table manners. Ground beef browned in a pan, mixed with ketchup, mustard, a splash of vinegar, and a spoonful of brown sugar, maybe onions if you were lucky. Or unlucky, depending on who you asked. It was a dish that felt like a joke at first. Sloppy food for a sloppy world. But under the name was a recipe that worked. It was cheap, it was filling, and it made you feel like you had something special. It tasted like baseball nights and paper plates. Like birthday parties that did not have cake but always had enough to eat. It did not need sides, but it went well with whatever was in the cupboard. Corn, chips, or just the other half of the bun. In the world of working-class food, Sloppy Joes were a small rebellion. Against hunger, against silence, against the idea that dinner had to be neat to be good. They made a mess. And sometimes that is exactly what a good meal should do. hot chicken salad casserole is everything you want in a comfort food. It's got shredded chicken, creamy mayo, crunchy celery, and potato chips on top for that satisfying crunch that you can't get enough of. This casserole might have started as a church recipe, but it's made its way into countless family kitchens across the country, becoming a staple for any gathering. The creaminess from the mayo blends perfectly with the crunchy texture of the potato chips, making every bite feel like a cozy hug. This dish can be thrown together quickly, baked until golden and served hot, perfect for busy nights when you need something simple yet satisfying. Whether it's a quick weeknight meal or a potluck favorite, hot chicken salad casserole always gets rave reviews. And if you think this is a crowd pleaser, there's another dish on the horizon that's a little surprising but just as tasty. Oyster stew was often the dish of choice in colder months, cherished for its rich, creamy texture and subtle ocean flavor. Traditionally made with either canned or fresh oysters, this stew brought a sense of warmth and comfort to church suppers, especially during holidays or special occasions. The oysters were gently simmered in a milk or cream-based broth, often seasoned with a bit of onion, celery, and sometimes a dash of nutmeg for depth. This simple yet elegant dish was both affordable and filling, making it perfect for large gatherings. Though oysters might seem like a luxury today, canned oysters were widely accessible and a practical choice for many communities. The stew was typically served with warm, crusty bread for dipping, rounding out the meal. Its creamy richness offered a satisfying alternative to heavier meat-based dishes, especially in congregations that observed fasting or preferred lighter fare. Oyster stew was more than just a recipe. It was a tradition carried across generations, often featured in handwritten church cookbooks passed down as treasured family heirlooms. It represented not only nourishment, but also a shared history of resourcefulness and simple pleasures in communal dining. Tomato gravy over biscuits sounds strange until you taste it. Then it becomes unforgettable. Born in Southern kitchens, this was a way to stretch bacon drippings and canned tomatoes into something comforting and hot. After frying bacon or sausage, cooks would use the leftover grease as the base. They would whisk in flour to make a roux, then add chopped or crushed tomatoes and simmer it down to a thick, savory gravy. Sometimes a pinch of sugar, sometimes red pepper flakes. Poured over fresh buttermilk biscuits, it was tangy, rich, and full of body. This was not Sunday food. This was weekday food. Quick, cheap, and made with whatever was in the pantry. Kids grew up eating it for breakfast. Farmhands came in from the field and poured it over fried potatoes. But somehow, this dish slipped away. Maybe because people forgot how to make biscuits. Maybe because tomato gravy never made it into the cookbooks with the pretty pictures. But once upon a time, it was standard fare. French bread pizza was not just a meal, it was an event. Every kid in the 1980s knew the thrill of seeing a halved loaf of crusty French bread slathered in red sauce, buried under gooey mozzarella, and dotted with slices of pepperoni or whatever toppings you had on hand. It baked quickly, smelled incredible, and had just the right amount of crunch and chew. It felt fancier than frozen pizza, more fun than takeout, and more customizable than anything else in the freezer. The sauce came from a jar, the cheese came from a bag, and the bread came from the bakery rack at the supermarket. But when it all came together, it felt like magic. Parents loved it because it was cheap and fast. Kids loved it because it felt like something made just for them. No one argued over slices because everyone got their own half. It was a Friday night tradition, a birthday party standby, and a backup plan for when real dinner plans fell through. It may not have been elegant, but it was full of joy. Porcupine meatballs were strange little miracles, humble spheres of ground beef and white rice, simmering in a bath of tomato sauce that smelled like home. The name made kids laugh, but the taste made them quiet. These were the kinds of suppers that worked behind the scenes, holding families together while the world kept pushing in from every side. They were called porcupine because the rice poked through like little spines, but nobody cared about the looks. It was about stretching meat when meat was scarce, and rice was cheap and filling. Mothers learned it from pamphlets, from neighbors, from church potlucks, and made it their own. The tomato sauce turned sharp ingredients soft, mellowed out by slow simmering and kitchen patience. You might have had them with green beans from a can, or just bread soaked in sauce. There was no need to pretend they were fancy. They were enough. Enough to feed a family. Enough to say, "We'll get through this." The meat was never prime, the rice sometimes overcooked, but none of that mattered. Because the memory of sitting at the table, your legs swinging just above the floor, eating a plate of those soft little meatballs that stays with you longer than the taste ever did. The smell still lingers in old kitchens and secondhand cookbooks, waiting to be remembered. Funeral potatoes have earned their name for a reason. This cheesy, creamy hash brown casserole has long been a comforting dish at church gatherings, especially when times are tough. Combining crispy hash browns with a velvety sauce made of cream of chicken soup, sour cream, and shredded cheese, it's the kind of dish that wraps you in warmth with each bite. The top gets wonderfully golden and crispy, while the inside stays creamy and indulgent. While it's often brought to funeral luncheons to offer comfort to those in mourning, it's a dish that is delicious enough for any occasion. No need to wait for a somber event. Funeral potatoes make an excellent side dish to serve with nearly any meal. And if you think this casserole is rich, just wait until you see what's coming next. Another comforting classic that's just as good for family dinners as it is for a church potluck. Scalloped corn was a comforting dish that blended creamy, sweet corn with crunchy breadcrumbs and melted cheese to create a nostalgic favorite found only in old church cookbooks. The layers of creamed corn were carefully poured into a baking dish and topped with buttery breadcrumbs and a sprinkle of cheddar or other cheeses, then baked until golden and bubbling. This dish was often served as either a main or a side at church suppers, offering warmth and familiar flavors that reminded many of home-cooked family dinners. Scalloped corn spoke to a time when convenience met tradition, using canned or fresh corn to stretch meals and satisfy hungry crowds. Its creamy texture, combined with a crisp topping, made it an accessible luxury in many rural and small-town communities. The recipe was easy to scale up for potlucks and fundraisers, which helped maintain its presence in church menus. Today, scalloped corn is a cherished reminder of the resourceful, hearty cooking that sustained congregations through decades of change and challenge. Baked stuffed onions were the farmhouse version of making something elegant out of almost nothing. Big, sweet onions were hollowed out, and their insides chopped and mixed with breadcrumbs, sausage, herbs, and sometimes cheese or whatever was left in the kitchen. That savory mix got packed right back into the onion shells, which were lined up in a pan, drizzled with butter, and baked until the tops turned golden and the scent drifted through the whole house. It was warm, slow, and comforting, never fast or showy. You might get 2 or 3 onions per person with a side of mashed potatoes or green beans and call that supper. For farm families who grew their own produce, this was a clever way to use up a big harvest and make it feel like a celebration. You were not wasting anything, not even the outer layers of the onion. But like so many recipes that took time and attention, baked stuffed onions faded away. Maybe it was the rise of quick dinners, maybe it was the loss of gardens. Either way, this was a dish that fed bellies and gave you the kind of quiet pride that only comes from making do beautifully. Baked ziti with Jared sauce was the Italian-American supper that could feed an army without breaking a sweat. It was not lasagna, but it hit all the same notes: gooey cheese, rich tomato sauce, and plenty of pasta. Ziti noodles were cooked just until tender, then tossed with store-bought marinara or meat sauce. Italian sausage or meatballs often joined the party. Everything got layered into a baking dish with shredded mozzarella and sometimes a bit of Parmesan on top. Into the oven it went, bubbling until the edges were crisp and the cheese was pulling in every direction. It was hearty, cheap, and perfect for leftovers. Baked ziti was a weeknight miracle. It could be made in bulk, served at potlucks, or frozen for later. You knew what you were getting every single time, and that consistency made it one of the most loved casseroles of the 1980s. It was red-sauced joy, one scoop at a time. Some families added ricotta, some skipped the meat, but everyone had a version. Goulash was America's answer to too many mouths and not enough money. a one-pot wonder of elbow macaroni, ground beef, tomato sauce, and whatever spices had not run out yet. It was not Hungarian goulash, though the name gave it a bit of foreign flair. This was something else, something ours. It cooked fast, stretched far, and tasted better the longer it sat. Some added corn, some added beans, others kept it simple. It did not matter. What mattered was how it fed everyone. Big portions, big comfort. You could find it in school cafeterias, church potlucks, and Wednesday night dinners all across the country. It was the flavor of the middle class, hearty, red, and slightly overcooked, and it stuck with you. In a world that often asked too much, goulash gave everything it had, and that made it unforgettable. Liver and onions with brown gravy is one of those forgotten classics that was once the centerpiece of many Sunday suppers. Yes, it might not be the most popular dish today, but it was a beloved favorite for generations. The rich, earthy taste of the liver paired perfectly with the savory brown gravy, while the onions added a bit of sweetness and texture to balance out the flavors. Some grandmothers swore by this dish, preparing it for Sunday family meals, where it was often served alongside mashed potatoes and vegetables. Though it may be seen as an acquired taste for those who loved it, liver and onions were a comforting, satisfying meal. The recipe was simple but effective, showcasing the beauty of slow cooking and rich flavors. And just when you thought we'd covered all the forgotten classics, there's another gelatin dish on the way that might just surprise you. Keep reading for the next recipe. Scalloped oysters were a festive supper that graced tables during special church occasions, combining the rich brininess of oysters with creamy sauce and crunchy breadcrumbs. The oysters were layered or mixed into a white sauce made with cream or milk, then topped with buttery breadcrumbs before baking to a golden finish. This dish was a favorite for those seeking indulgence during times when fresh seafood was accessible. It brought elegance to communal meals while still being straightforward to prepare in large quantities. Scalloped oysters celebrated local or seasonal bounty and were often associated with holiday dinners or fundraisers. Their luxurious texture and flavor made them a memorable part of church supper traditions, showcasing how simple ingredients could be transformed into dishes worthy of celebration and shared enjoyment. Chicken fricassee was the kind of dish that took its time and gave back even more. You started with an old hen or a young bird that would not roast right, cut into pieces, dusted in flour, and browned in a hot skillet until golden. Then came the onions, garlic, and broth, maybe a splash of milk or cream if you had it. Everything simmered low and slow until the chicken was so tender it practically melted off the bone. What you ended up with was a silky, comforting gravy and meat that tasted like it had been loved for hours. It was spooned over mashed potatoes, egg noodles, or even a thick slice of bread. No two fricassees were ever quite the same. Some were light, some were dark, some were thick, others were thin. But they all had that one thing in common. They were made with care. It used to be a farmhouse favorite, passed down in splattered notebooks and whispered kitchen instructions. If you ever get the chance to try it, you will understand why it mattered. Chicken and rice. Bake with cream of mushroom soup was the casserole that cooked while you did anything else. Dump a few boneless chicken breasts into a baking dish. Add white rice, a can of cream of mushroom soup, and some water or broth. Stir, cover, bake. That was it. The rice soaked up all the flavor from the soup and the chicken, turning soft and creamy while the top browned just enough to give it texture. You would take off the foil and suddenly, dinner was ready. It did not ask for attention. It just quietly got the job done. If your parents worked long hours, this was the kind of meal that waited patiently in the oven. It was never flashy, but it was always there. It fed everyone at the table, left you full, and saved your family from another night of fast food. Chicken and rice bake was not about bold flavors or eye-catching colors. It was about consistency. It was about stretching a few cans and a handful of rice into something warm and whole. And somehow, it always worked. TV dinners were not just meals. They were moments. Packaged in foil trays, pulled from the freezer with a kind of reverence, they promised more than just food. They promised time. Time to sit in front of the television, legs crossed on the carpet, with a plastic fork in hand and your favorite show flickering in front of you. Each tray had its sections: meat with brown gravy, mashed potatoes with a crater of margarine, peas or corn that somehow tasted frozen even when hot, and a tiny dessert you always ate first. It was not gourmet, it was barely warm sometimes, but it was yours. And for a child in the 1970s, eating a TV dinner meant independence. It meant being part of a modern world, even if just for 20 minutes. For parents, it meant one less pot to clean, one less battle to fight. And sure, the meat was tough and the peas were weird, but that did not matter. What mattered was the experience, the novelty, the quiet miracle of having dinner without having to make it. In a decade filled with hard choices, TV dinners offered one easy one. And sometimes, that was enough to feel okay for just a little while. If you ever tasted one of these 1980s suppers, you've lived the good kind of history. Share your favorite below, and don't forget to like and subscribe to keep those classic flavors alive.